Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Super Mario Bros. Finally, Super Mario Bros. Is here. It only took 118 games to reach one of Nintendo's most historically significant titles. Before I jump into my time with this one, let's take a look at what exactly made this game such an important part of gaming history. The early 80s were a rough time for gaming in the US. The video game crash of 1983 left the video game market in the US in dire straits, and everyone thought gaming was a passing fad with no hope of revival. During this time, Nintendo boldly launched the NES in the US, confident that they could turn the market around. In my video on Stack Up, I talked a lot about what this time was like for Nintendo of America and what tactics they used to get their console onto store shelves. So if you want to learn more about just how bad things were during this time, check out that video first. However, in that video, I intentionally left the story at the national launch of the system, and I didn't go into too much detail about just how big of an impact the NES had in the US nationwide. I did this because the national launch of the NES is largely where Rob's story ends, as it was a new title that stole the show and propelled the console into stardom. This game was none other than Super Mario Bros. This title was a project that was headed by Nintendo's rising stars, Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka. These two had already worked on a few titles together, such as Devil World, Excitebike, and Kung Fu. Around this time, Nintendo even formed their fourth development team, Nintendo R&D 4. This team was headed by Miyamoto himself, and it pretty quickly became Nintendo's A-team. They became responsible for many of Nintendo's greatest hits, such as the Legend of Zelda franchise, F-Zero, Star Fox, Pikmin, Animal Crossing, Wii Sports, Splatoon, and of course, the Super Mario franchise itself. While I don't want to completely discredit Nintendo's previous works up until this point, the formation of this team really marks a turning point for Nintendo. Personally, I think this was when Nintendo really started to set themselves apart from the competition as some of the greatest developers in the industry. Another individual I want to touch on that contributed to this game was Toshihiko Nakago. Nakago owned a small company known as Systems Research and Development, or SRD for short. This wasn't Nakago's first time doing programming work with Nintendo, as SRD had been assisting Nintendo with their Famicom games since the very first arcade ports on the system. SRD performed much of the programming work for Super Mario Bros. 2, and Nakago and his company have continued to work alongside Nintendo to this day, with SRD finally becoming a subsidiary of Nintendo in April of 2022. These three individuals, Miyamoto, Tezuka, and Nakago, became a powerhouse for Nintendo, and they were even called Nintendo's Golden Triangle by Iwata during interviews. One final major contributor I want to talk about was the composer Koji Kondo. While this wasn't his first gig at Nintendo, it would become one of his most significant, and the Super Mario Bros. Main theme would go on to be one of the most well-known songs in all of gaming. While I know some people argue about exactly how much inspiration he took from other jazz titles at the time, there's no denying that his work on the game had a huge impact, and it marked an important evolution on how integral music design would become to gaming. Turning back to Miyamoto, it seems like he had the idea for this one cooking for a little while. He wanted to take the knowledge he learned from other side-scrollers he had worked on, like Excitebike and Kung Fu, to make the next evolution in what he called at the time, athletic games. In the earliest stages of development, they weren't even sure if they were going to use Mario as the protagonist yet, and apparently it was after Tezuka found out about how well Mario Bros. Had been selling on the Famicom that they decided to proceed with Mario as the main character. Now, at this time, Nintendo was working on a disc attachment for the Famicom called the Famicom Disk System. As part of this new development, it was Nintendo's intention to stop using carts altogether for the Famicom and to instead switch to discs from this point onward. I'll be talking more about the Famicom Disk System once we reach its big launch title, The Legend of Zelda. However, I wanted to bring it up now because apparently the pressure of Super Mario Bros. Being Nintendo's final cartridge game on the system was a big motivator for Miyamoto, as he wanted to go all out and create something that deserved its position as the last cartridge game on the system. Humorously, this ended up not being the final cartridge game on the system at all, but luckily for us, Miyamoto gave it his all anyway. One big focus they gave the game was Mario's new larger size. They did their initial test with just exclusively using a larger character, and while they really liked it, they evolved the idea into an upgraded form that would be obtained once you touch a super mushroom. These magical mushrooms inspired the game's new setting too. No longer was Mario a plumber from New York, he was now the intrepid hero of the Mushroom Kingdom, a world inhabited by peaceful mushroom people. While it was never spelled out in the manual, according to Miyamoto, the idea of Mario and Luigi arriving in the Mushroom Kingdom through a mysterious pipe was always the intention behind the story, and it is why so many adaptations have stuck with this plot. Along with this new setting came other new characters that would become staples for the franchise. Pauline no longer fit the setting anymore, so they designed Princess Toadstool to serve as the new damsel in distress. They also designed an entirely new villain, Bowser, to serve as the antagonist of the game. For his appearance, they decided to stick with the turtle-themed enemies from Mario Bros. And made Bowser the king of the Koopas. However, Miyamoto has stated that Bowser's appearance was also partially inspired by the Ox King from the animated film Alakazam the Great, which is likely where his horns, snout, and monstrous teeth come from. There's one final thing about the story I want to clear up. While yes, the manual does say that Bowser has turned all of the toads into stones, bricks, and plants, Mario is not killing the toads by breaking blocks. The manual specifically says on a later page that when Mario encounters the toads that have been turned into bricks, they reward Mario with a power-up. What this means is that the toads that have been turned into bricks are the question mark blocks, and those do not get destroyed when they are hit. So no, I do not think Super Mario Bros. Is a secretly dark game about Mario murdering innocent toads. Going back to the Super Mushroom, this idea of turning small Mario from Donkey Kong and Mario Bros. Into the larger Super Mario would inspire the game's name, Super Mario Bros. Mario's new size wasn't the only thing super either. The game featured colorful backgrounds and multiple types of environments, a change from the standard black backgrounds that many other similar games used at the time. Additionally, the game featured 32 handcrafted levels, and it followed an 8-world structure with each world containing a boss at the end. The game also used a far more complex physics engine than anything before it, and while some people today might find the game to be a bit too slippery, the momentum-based physics were unlike anything that came before it, and it was the start of a physics style that Nintendo would go on to refine in future titles. While many of the ideas in this game were present in Nintendo's titles up until this point, this game combined them and refined them in a way like nothing else before it. It took the individual handcrafted levels of games like Ice Climber, Wrecking Crew, and Gyromite, the boss structure from Kung Fu, the fast screen scrolling from Excitebike, the platforming from Mario Bros. And Donkey Kong, and tied them all up into a refined package with an all-new level of attention to detail. The overall design of this game was a revolutionary point for the platformer genre, and I would even argue that it marked an important evolutionary step for gaming as a whole. Up until this point, I think many companies saw consoles strictly as arcade machines at home, and as a result, many arcade conventions carried over to their console games. Ideas such as infinitely looping levels, high score chasing, and single-stage formats that increased in difficulty over time were dominant in many of the games I've played up until this point. While I don't think games that focus on these ideas are bad or anything, I think Super Mario Bros. Proved that gaming could go beyond what arcades typically provided. I can't really confidently say Super Mario Bros. Was the absolute first game to do this, but I think it showed to mainstream audiences just how much more complex gaming could actually be. It didn't take long for Nintendo to realize that Super Mario Bros. Was a massive hit, and the game quickly became the console's killer app. The game bolstered the sales of the Famicom in Japan, and for the national launch of the NES in the US, Nintendo of America even created a second bundle that included Super Mario Bros. With the system instead of ROB. Including these packaged in-game sales, Super Mario Bros. Would end up selling over 50 million units on the NES, a staggering number that was unlike anything else in the industry before it. To this day, it is still one of the highest selling video games of all time. It really is hard to convey just how much of an impact this game had on both the success of the NES and on gaming as a whole. While I don't think it's entirely fair to attribute the revival of video games in the US to one singular event, there's no denying that Super Mario Bros. Played a massive role in the success of the NES, which in turn played a key role in reviving the video game industry too. While the explosive popularity of the console brought new competition along with it, none were able to scratch its success at the time. The NES far outsold the competition during the third generation, and it sold more than any other console before it. Without further ado, let's take a look at my time with the game. Going into this, I already knew how I wanted to approach this one. I decided I would play through the entire game without warps to showcase every level, then beat the game again in hard mode using warps. Out of all the games I've played so far, this is probably the one I've played the most, so this one will not be from the perspective of a beginner. You start off in level 1-1. Man, what an iconic level. I don't even think this one needs any explanation. Of course, you've got the very first Goomba, which probably has a higher kill count than most single enemies across all of gaming. I stomped him easily though and proceeded to get the first mushroom. I have a funny story I remember from my childhood about these blocks. If you look carefully, you can see that when Mario jumps in this game, he raises his hand to punch the blocks. However, when I was younger, my mother thought he was bonking all of the blocks with his head, and I distinctly remember her agonizing over how painful it must be to hit the blocks like this. Anyway, there's a secret pipe here to skip most of the level, but I wanted to see it all, so I ignored it. Of course, I knew where the hidden 1-up was here too, so I went ahead and grabbed it. There's actually a hidden 1-up in the first stage of every world, but they have the weird requirement that you must also grab every coin in the previous world's third level for them to appear. However, since there is no world before 1-1, you get the 1-up for free here. Similarly, if you warp to a world, you can get the 1-up mushroom without the coin requirement too. On the topic of lives, did you know that on a game over, you can push A plus start to restart in the world you died in? I grew up my whole life never knowing this was possible. While I didn't show it off here, I figured I'd mention it for anyone who might want to pick this one up for the first time. After this, I got a fire flower and I was fully upgraded. I kind of forgot where the start in this stage was though, and I just barely missed it. The rest went by easily and I was on to level 2. This level takes place underground and it's almost as iconic as level 1. I didn't miss the star this time and I finally got to hear the sweet sound of invincibility. There's another hidden 1-up mushroom in this one, which I got with ease. This upper path let me skip much of the level 2, so I was able to beat it pretty easily. Next was level 3, and this one is another new stage type. These types of levels are up in the sky and often feature more bottomless pits and precarious platforming than the other types of levels. The challenges were no match for me though, and it was on to level 4. Next up was the final level of World 1, the castle. These levels often have a lot of lava and spinning fire bars, which can make them pretty tricky. I made it to the boss though with my fire flower in hand, and oh no, it's Bowser himself. There's 2 ways you could typically tackle these bosses. You can either get behind Bowser and touch the axe behind the bridge, or you could just defeat him with fireballs, assuming you made it to the boss with a power-up. I used the fire flower here, and doing so reveals that it wasn't Bowser at all, but a measly Goomba in disguise. When you clear the world, you'll find not Princess Peach, but a Toad. He then lets out one of the most iconic lines in all of gaming. "Thank you, Mario, but our princess is in another castle." After this, you are taken to the next world. In level 2-1, I finally took damage. I stupidly looked at my chat while I was trying to jump on a Koopa. I missed it and got hit. Getting hit in this one brings you all the way down to Small Mario 2. Guess I gotta be a bit more careful. Unfortunately, while I was hunting for the hidden 1-up, I completely failed to jump on a moving shell and lost my first life. Darn. I did a lot better on my next attempt, and I even cleared the level with another fire flower. Level 2-2 takes you to one final new type of level, water levels. Man, when I compare this to everything else I've played so far, 5 different level types is a lot more variety than I ever realized looking back on it. It may not seem like much now, but it really helps the game stand out and feel more fresh from level to level. Anyway, fire flowers make water levels much easier since it's the only way to hit cheeps and bloopers, so I got through this one without a scratch. While level 2-3 is technically another sky level, this one sends swarms of fish at you from below the bridges. It's a bit hectic, but as long as you keep up a steady pace, it's not so bad. In 2-4, I once again destroyed the fake Bowser with a fireball, and this time it was a Koopa in disguise. While level 3-1 is basically just another normal type of level, they've swapped the palette up now so it looks like it's nighttime. I don't know if the white trees are supposed to look like snow, but that's how I always imagined it when I was younger. In this level, I accidentally went down a pipe while showing off duck jumps. I was searching for the hidden 1-up, so I was actually afraid that I missed it. These type of secrets are hidden all throughout the game, although I skipped most of them. Luckily, I still got the 1-up, but I ran into one of the worst enemies in the game soon after. Hammer Bros. The fire flower makes these guys much easier though, so I got through unscathed. The rest of the world went pretty smoothly. I smoked levels 2 and 3 and made it to Bowser once again with the fire flower. This time it was a buzzy beetle in disguise. Level 4-1 introduces another pretty brutal enemy, the Lakitu. You probably already know this, but these guys throw an endless amount of spinies at you, so it's generally a good idea to move as fast as you can to avoid getting overwhelmed with enemies. Level 4-2 went by without a hitch, and 4-3 was another sky level. This time they used mushrooms as the platforms, which doesn't change a whole lot, but at least it looks different, I guess. Next up was 4-4, and this one introduces a rarely used but brutal mechanic. In this level, you have to go the exact right way or the level loops. There's no real way of knowing if you've gone the wrong way until after it loops, and the levels that use this mechanic get more complex, so it can be pretty obscure to know exactly where you're supposed to go. Later versions of the game improve this by playing sounds when you make the correct or incorrect choice. Somehow though, I got completely lucky here and made it on my first try. It went by so smoothly that I wasn't even sure it was a looping level at first. Bowser went down to the fire power-up again, and this time he was just a spiny. In World 5-1, I took damage and finally lost my power-up, but I still managed to clear the level without dying at least. In 5-2, after a close call with a hammer bro, I found another type of secret in this game. Some blocks have vines, and after you climb them, you get to ride a cloud and get a bunch of free coins. I also got my fire flower back after pulling off this weird maneuver later in the level too. Level 5-3 is another sky level, and this one sends a barrage of bullet bills at you while you play through the stage. Thankfully, I did just fine once again, and I got to the castle fully powered up. I had so many lives at this point that I actually made it past 9 lives, and once you do this, the game shows a crown to indicate that you were above 9 lives. In 5-4, I had a close call with the fire bars, but I got to Bowser with the fire power-up again, and this time he was revealed to be a Lakitu. You know, if all of these enemies could somehow turn into Bowser like this, why don't they all do it? They would have been a much bigger threat if they actually did this. Most of World 6 went by without a hitch. The game is definitely getting harder, but honestly, this was one of the best runs I've ever had of this game. Maybe playing all of these retro games in a row improved my skills more than I realized. Unfortunately, in 6-4, I finally took damage in a castle, which meant I actually had to get the axe this time. Bowser starts throwing hammers here too, which makes him a lot more brutal. I managed to run past him though and chop down the bridge. Unfortunately, when you do this, you don't get to see what enemy he is like you do with the fire flower. Apparently this one was a blooper. How the heck did he survive out of water? Anyway, on to World 7. I got totally cornered by the enemies right at the start of 7-1 and I lost my second life. This level is swarming with enemies, and while I did manage to get a mushroom, I got juked by Hammer Bros and lost it soon after. While I was soon able to get another mushroom, I got hit again by a blooper in 7-2. Man, these water levels are a lot more difficult if you don't have that fire flower. 7-3 was another level with jumping fish, and during this one I was greedy for the coins and I jumped right into one of them. Later on in the same level, I overcompensated after thinking I was going to fall into a pit and I landed right in front of a Koopa. I died again in this one after failing miserably to gain enough speed to jump over a pit. Yeesh, I'm suddenly starting to lose a lot of lives here, right after I was boasting about how good I was doing too. Can I actually make this in one go? Anyway, it was close, but I got to the end of 7-3 as Tiny Mario. Phew, finally beat that nightmare. Level 7-4 was another one of those weird maze castles. I tried to figure this one out on my own, but I eventually gave up and just looked up the right path online. This one must have been brutal back in the pre-internet days. Unfortunately, the fake Bowser got me with the tip of his tail before I touched the axe, so I had to do the whole thing again. Thankfully, I got him next time though, so it was time for World 8. At this point, I had 5 lives remaining. Let's hope it's enough. Right when I started the next world though, I did a really bad jump into a Koopa at the start of the level. Ouch, not off to a great start. The final stairs were starting to get more tough too, but thankfully I made it to the end. I'm still Tiny Mario though, which isn't great. Level 8-2 has a 1-up near the beginning, which you can use to essentially get infinite tries in the level, assuming you don't die before it. This level has a brutal section where you need to obtain running speed on single tile blocks after a pipe. I remember dying to this so much as a kid. Apparently there's a pretty easy strat where you can build up enough speed on the left block to run over the one tile gap and make it pretty easily. That makes this so much easier than I remember. I got to level 8-3 while large, and this level is covered in Hammer Bros. Thankfully, I got by the first batch without a scratch, which meant I could get a fire flower, and this would make the Hammer Brothers much easier to deal with. Unfortunately, I messed up soon after, and I still ended up losing it to a Hammer Brother. Come on, what's up with that hitbox? I definitely did not touch that hammer. I made it to the end of the level with a large mushroom, but I still had to make it up this final scary stair section. Something kind of funny about this part is that it is essentially the same as the stair climb in 8-1, with only a bit more danger at the end. However, the lack of blocks make it seem 10 times scarier, despite not actually being all that much harder than the previous climb. I made it just fine though, and it was on to 8-4, the final level. This one is sort of similar to previous maze castles. However, instead of needing to go in the right path, you have to go into the right pipes. Luckily, I completely remembered the correct path. Basically, you just always need to enter the first pipe after the first pool of lava you see in each room. One of these is too high up though, and you've got to use a hidden block to reach it. After a while, you reach a surprise water section where some fire bars are surviving just fine underwater for some reason. Once you finish this, you face off against something almost harder than the final boss himself, a lone Hammer Bro. While I did manage to get through him, it was at the cost of my power-up. Now I had to face Bowser as Tiny Mario. Great. It was pretty scary, but I did it. I beat Bowser on my first try. Nice. Finally, I found Princess Toadstool. She then thanked me for rescuing her, and she told me how to access hard mode. Honestly, this went by a lot smoother than I expected. However, now it's time for that harder difficulty. I've never actually done this before, so maybe I'll run into more trouble here. I'm planning on using the warps though, which should make it easier. In hard mode, all Goombas are replaced with buzzy beetles, enemies move faster, elevators are smaller, and some of the earlier levels are changed to harder versions from later in the game. Level 1-1 wasn't all that interesting, but I did get the star this time at least. To reach the warp zone in 1-2, you simply have to get over the exit pipe, which lets you warp all the way to World 4. There's another warp in 4-2 that you have to use hidden blocks and a vine to access. This one lets you warp all the way to World 8, the final world. I don't think hard mode honestly made all that much of a difference, as I got through most of World 8 relatively unscathed, although I did get hit once by a bullet bill in 8-3. Unfortunately, in 8-4, I got hit by a blooper, meaning I had to be Small Mario for both the Hammer Bro and Bowser. This time, I tried a new quick strat for the Hammer Bro, and thankfully it worked like a charm. I got through Bowser just fine too, and with that, hard mode was already complete. There was one final thing I wanted to do, reach World -1. If you didn't already know, there's an infamous glitch in this game. If you use a bug to get into the warp zone in 1-2 before the pipes have all loaded in, you can enter a glitch world people call World -1. In reality, this is just the standard number-number format with the first number being a blank character. To pull this off, you can jump into the corner as Duck Large Mario, get a wall clip, then stand back up. The game will push you to the right through the wall, and you can enter the first pipe before everything loads in. I actually really struggled to get this. I kept breaking a block at the top that I needed, and every time I did this, I had to restart from the beginning. The level itself is just 7-2, and when you reach the final pipe, it takes you back to the beginning. You're just stuck here forever. That was the final thing I wanted to see with this one, so with that, Super Mario Bros. Was complete. On to the review. Man, it's clear to me why this game became so popular. I won't say this too often in the challenge, but this game raised the bar for gaming as a whole and set a new standard for how much better gaming could be. Just about everything in this title feels like a step up from everything before it, from the level design to the physics to the music. While I do like the game quite a bit, I do still have some issues with it. The physics are a bit more slippery than I would like, and while the level design is a step up from anything before it, a lot of the levels, especially the standard overworld levels, don't actually do all that much interesting. Additionally, while the Bowser fights try to shake things up the further you get into it, the repeated bosses feel like a bit of a downgrade from the unique bosses Kung Fu had. However, I still like this game quite a bit, and while it's not one of my all-time favorites, it certainly raised the bar for gaming. I gave the game an 8 out of 10, which is the first 8 I've given so far in the challenge. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.